Hello, plan fiduciaries. Today, we're going to talk about the fiduciary responsibility we have in monitoring the record keepers. We're going to talk about ways of evaluating or looking, comparing different record keepers and what's important for us as plan fiduciaries in terms of understanding which record keepers might be a better fit for our employees. Remember, your very first step in setting up a retirement plan is to determine who the plan fiduciaries are, which is generally going to be the members of the retirement plan committee. Plan fiduciaries need a plan fiduciary advisor. I'm a certified plan fiduciary advisor, but I still need to partner with outside service providers to serve the plan adequately, which means I'm going to partner with a record keeper and in some cases also an administrator if it's an unbundled solution. There's a way sometimes in which the record keeper and the administrator are the same in a bundled solution, but sometimes they're separate in an unbundled solution. We've talked about this before as well, but the importance of discharging fiduciary duties, whether that's under ERISA Code Section 321, 338, 402A, or 316. Now, the record keeper is what we're going to talk about evaluating today. You have a responsibility as a plan fiduciary to evaluate the record keeper. And how do we do so? Understand this when it comes to discharging fiduciary liability. What the record keeper does is almost never fiduciary in nature. In fact, the services of the record keeper are largely ministerial in nature, not fiduciary. The record keeper simply keeps records, sends statements, which are the paper copies of those records, and provides a website, which is the electronic copy of those records. But what they're doing is they're acting at the direction of you, the plan fiduciary, or me, the plan fiduciary advisor, or sometimes the administrator, if the administrator is serving as an administrative fiduciary. The record keeper is only an order taker. They're there working at our direction. If a mistake is made, from a compliance perspective, if a mistake is made by the record keeper, they're not even liable. We're actually liable as plan fiduciaries. So we should make sure that we're understanding how to evaluate our record keepers. Generally, the record keeper will be a bank or a mutual fund company or money manager or an insurance company. Now, there's only one bank really nationally speaking that's left in the game, and that's JP Morgan. And honestly, they actually outsource their back office record keeping to another company. They don't even do the record keeping themselves. But a lot of the banks have gotten out of the business. The margins are just not great from a profitability perspective. The bank makes more on everything else from commercial loans, mortgages, everything else, personal banking, everything else besides record keeping. It's not a very profitable business. So banks have mostly gotten out of this industry. There are some small regional banks. I would tell you as a plan fiduciary, you should be very careful in selecting a small regional bank because large record keepers probably invest more in just cyber technology in terms of protecting your data than these small regional banks make in their entire record keeping practice. So be careful about working with small banks that don't have the resources. But then if you're working with a mutual fund company, don't forget that the mutual fund company is going to be primarily concerned with money management. So their big deal is trying to provide record keeping just to get people into the investments that they actually manage. So there's only four money managers or mutual fund companies that are still in the business of record keeping: American Funds, Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, and Fidelity. And they can all do, well, not all, but most of them do a decent job. It's just a question of whether they allow you to be diversified with your investments, or if it's a plan that's with American funds, it has to be all American funds investments because you don't want any of all one fund company. You want to be more diversified than that. The third option is the insurance companies, and insurance companies seem to be where a lot of the record keeping is moving. So generally speaking, your record keeping is going to be a bank, a mutual fund company, or an insurance company. At times, it can be an administrator or even sometimes a payroll company. But you want to be able to evaluate whether these are the right fits for your employees. Okay. So, what are some considerations for monitoring the record keeper? Because we have a fiduciary responsibility as a plan fiduciary to monitor the record keeper, especially if they're not operating in a fiduciary role. we have a responsibility as fiduciaries to monitor them. So, how do we monitor them? Well, we should look at investments and we should look at fiduciary risk transfer and also their service, their technology, what are they costing, things like that, because we have to do what is exclusively in the best interest of plan participants. So which provider provides the best services, the lowest or best cost? It's not always the lowest cost, I should clarify, because sometimes you pay more, but you also get more. So it's not just the lowest cost, but it's the best value. And then the best technology, what's going to help your employees. So let's break these down a little bit more. When it comes to investments, there are generally two different ways of looking at it. There's either going to be an open architecture approach or a limited fund choice. So there are literally tens of thousands of investments that are available through the various stock markets. And so a record keeper will either have a limited fund choice, or even sometimes I'll hear record keepers who say, oh, we're open architecture, but you really can't find every single available investment on their platform. They only allow you to see investments that those companies have paid to be on the platform. So that's a huge differentiator when you're evaluating. And as a plan fiduciary, we have to evaluate whether it's the best investment lineup for the employees. Are they completely open architecture? We can choose any fund in the universe, or is it a limited fund choice? That's a really important distinction. Also, the difference between proprietary funds or record keeping only. So, a lot of these record keepers make money on their underlying investments. If it's their own investments, right, they're going to make more money. If you're working with the XYZ record keeper and you're using XYZ small cap fund, they're making money on that. So there are a few, not very many, but there are a few providers out there that are record keeping only. They literally will charge a per head fee for record keeping only, for only providing record keeping, and it's the same price whether whatever investments you use, it doesn't matter. A proprietary fund means that you're having to use their particular investments. Now there's a few that would say, oh no, you can use other investments, but it'll increase your cost. So you need to know that as a plan fiduciary in terms of evaluating the record keeper. And then there's this idea of the lowest cost share class. It's interesting because I work with lots of different record keepers. We have plans all over the country. If I say to a particular provider, hey, we'd like to change to the XYZ small cap fund, they might say, oh, what share class of the XYZ fund? And what they mean is I could put any share class in there that I want because they're not required to use the lowest share class. There are others that I say, hey, switch us over to the XYZ small cap fund. And they will automatically go to whatever the lowest cost share class is of that particular investment, whether it's like the R6 share or something like that. They automatically go to the lowest cost share class, which is helpful to know as a plan fiduciary. Also, how do they handle professional portfolios? So I think you know this. If you've worked with me very long, you know that I'm not a fan of self directing. All of the research shows that self directing is not advantageous. Self directing is just unlikely to be a good strategy over time. And it's not just because the professional managers are so much smarter and so much better at picking funds, although many times they are. It's also that they're less emotionally involved. So when the market goes down, they're just managing investments in terms of what's best for everybody. They're not emotionally involved. And when the market goes down, they make a huge correction and move to cash because they get scared or whatever. So when people are self-directing, they often make investment decisions that are not advantageous for their account. So we want to try to encourage professionally managed portfolios. Professionally managed portfolios will diversify the portfolios and take the guesswork and, more importantly, the emotions out of the process. Now, there's two different ways to do this. You can use an age-based strategy or a risk-based strategy. A lot of people will use a risk-based strategy. From a behavioral perspective, I don't think it's as advantageous. For one, a lot of employees have no idea what their risk tolerance is. They don't know whether they should be aggressive or conservative, or if they're aggressive, still may not be aggressive investors. They may be aggressive in other areas of life, but they may not be aggressive investors. So most people have no idea what their risk tolerance is. It's really hard to use this use a risk-based strategy as a default investment. More importantly, your risk changes over time. So if you're using an age-based strategy, it will de-risk you as you get closer to retirement. So I'm a huge fan of an age-based type of a strategy, not a risk-based strategy. But then you have to look at the record keeper you're working with and decide, can we use a custom target age portfolio or a target date fund from that particular record keeper? The thing you definitely don't want to do as a plan fiduciary is get stuck in a situation where you're using like XYZ company for record keeping and then the XYZ target date fund. If the XYZ target date fund is performing well, if it's low cost or if it's hitting your parameters and objectives under the investment policy statement, then that can be a good decision. But what happens if it falls out of favor, if it begins to not perform well? We've had this situation where we wanted to move out of the XYZ funds, but we were using XYZ record keeper. We went back to the record keeper and said, "Hey, can we change that fund out and put the Vanguard target date funds in there, or the Fidelity target date funds, or T. Rowe Price, another target date fund series, right?" And they said, "Well, no, you can't do that, or if you do that, it's going to change the price." So be really careful as a plan fiduciary in using proprietary investments, particularly proprietary target date funds. Does the plan allow you to build custom target age portfolios? That's generally going to be a better strategy. Not every record keeper allows you to do that. So you want to be able to know that when you evaluate. So there's a lot of different things to know about evaluating record keepers, particularly because they're really not all the same and they will not serve in a fiduciary capacity. So what are you getting when you're buying a particular record keeper? You have to make sure you look beyond just the cost. That's what we generally evaluate when we're evaluating one record keeper over another. We've got to move beyond that to value, and we've got to understand as a plan fiduciary our responsibility to evaluate a lot more than just their services and technology. All right. Hey, we want you to be smarter about managing your plan for your fiduciaries, and we want to make sure you're not assuming more fiduciary risk than necessary. Let me know if you have any questions.